The story follows a lone adventurer who defied a forbidden law. According to an ancient nobleman's diary, consuming monsters was considered a grave taboo in this world. For a human to ingest a monster meant absorbing its dark essence. The first symptom of this curse was a surge of indescribable euphoria, coupled with an immediate enhancement of physical strength. The second stage brought unbearable headaches, intense nausea, and a state of overwhelming intoxication. But the final, and perhaps deadliest, symptom was instant death upon consuming the monster's essence, or, worse yet, the transformation of the person into a monster themselves. In the dimly lit chamber deep within the labyrinth, a man sat atop the lifeless body of a monster, his hand crushed and mangled. He was relentlessly devouring the creature's flesh. As he finished the last bite, his wounds began to miraculously heal. In that instant, he gained 2 new skills, Roar and Battle Axe. Overcome with fury, he unleashed a deafening roar, his voice resonating through the darkness. The sound echoed throughout the labyrinth, alerting every nearby monster to his presence. Upon hearing the man's roar, the nearby monsters charged toward him, intent on killing him. As they lunged at him, the man swiftly drew his axe and began his bloody rampage, slaughtering every creature that rushed his way. No matter how fiercely the monsters attacked, he dispatched them instantly with powerful swings of his weapon. With each kill, he devoured their remains, absorbing their essence into his body. As he consumed more, he gained new skills, further enhancing his strength and fueling his relentless massacre. As the man continued his relentless slaughter, he gained a multitude of new skills, including agility boost, lightning cloak, poison mist, and thread manipulation, among others. He skillfully employed each ability to aid him in his fight against the seemingly endless monsters. Despite his immense power and the numerous skills at his disposal, the sheer number of monsters began to wear him down, and fatigue started to set in. Confident he had slain enough to escape the labyrinth, he paused for a moment, only to realize that countless more monsters still surrounded him, closing in from all sides. As the man stood surrounded by the approaching monsters, he made a firm resolve. In that moment, he vowed to himself that he would kill every last one of them, escape the labyrinth alive, and return home safely, no matter the cost. In the frontier city of Bologna, a territory dotted with numerous labyrinths, one stood out among the rest, the Miasma Labyrinth. The very air inside it relentlessly sapped the strength of any adventurer who dared to enter. Most avoided the place, despising the constant drain on their abilities, except for one man, Rude. Rude frequently ventured into the labyrinth, unbothered by its dangers. Over time, the other adventurers began to call him the miasma scavenger, for his fearless persistence in exploring its depths. As Rude stepped into the miasma labyrinth, a sense of satisfaction washed over him. He had made it to the 6th floor, and as he surveyed the ground, he was pleased to find an abundance of miasma grass growing there. This rare herb, known for its ability to purify miasma, was an invaluable source of income for him. However, Rude reminded himself not to be greedy. He resolved to harvest only what he needed, taking just the right amount to ensure the labyrinth could replenish its supply. As Rude surveyed the miasma grass, he smiled, knowing that the harvest from the 6th floor would sustain him for about 3 days. As he continued through the labyrinth, he encountered miasma rats scurrying about. Many of the monsters in the miasma labyrinth wielded miasma and poison, which contributed to the adventurer's aversion to the place. However, these miasma and poison attacks were ineffective against Rude, who was impervious to their effects. Rude rushed toward the miasma rats, determined to eliminate them. However, as he fought, he began to struggle against the overwhelming number of rats swarming the area. Just as he was grappling with the situation, an unknown adventurer arrived and cast a fireball to help him. Unfortunately, the spell missed its target, allowing the rat to escape. Stunned and confused, Rude sat on the ground, trying to make sense of the unexpected intervention. Rude turned to the direction from which the fireball had come and saw 3 adventurers standing there. Recognizing their faces from the Adventurers Guild, he felt a surge of annoyance at their presence. At that moment, one of the 3 adventurers turned to the one who had cast the fireball and suggested that he should have aimed closer to ensure the spell hit its target. At that moment, one of the 3 adventurers extended a hand to help Rude up and apologized for the mishap. He introduced himself and asked Rude's name. Noting that Rude appeared to be struggling against the miasma rats, the adventurer explained that he and his companions had only intended to assist him in the fight. Rude, brushing off the adventurer's offer of help, got up on his own. He thanked the adventurer for his concern but requested that he be given a warning before any actions that might endanger him. Annoyed, the adventurer snapped that the reason he had shouted, "Fireball," was precisely to alert Rude before casting the spell. As they were talking, one of the three adventurers opened a door and informed the other two that the room beyond was filled with miasma grass. The other two adventurers were thrilled and excited by the news, but Rude was displeased by what he had just heard. Rude then asked why they had been secretly following him through the labyrinth and suggested they might be after his harvesting spot. One of the adventurers, looking irritated, explained that they were simply adventurers trying to make a living in the labyrinth and had coincidentally crossed paths with Rude. He added that they had merely come to his aid while saving him from the miasma rats and that Rude should be grateful for their assistance. The three adventurers glared at Rude with expressions of disgust and menace, fully aware that he was powerless to retaliate even if he was in the right. After some careful thought, Rude approached them, apologized for accusing them of following him, and thanked them for their help against the miasma rats. He understood that, despite his grievance, he had no means to confront them and thus decided to go along with the situation. Back in Bologna, at a restaurant called Full Belly, Rude was thrown to the floor by two men. One of them scolded Rude, saying that his presence in the restaurant ruined the taste of the food with his unpleasant smell. The man told Rude that he was banned from entering the establishment because Rude clearly couldn't understand how disruptive his smell was to other customers. At that moment, one of the men looked at Rude and said that a true adventurer was someone who could defeat monsters. He sneered, telling Rude that with his worthless skill, abnormal status nullification, he would never be able to become a real adventurer, no matter how hard he tried. The two men laughed loudly as they taunted Rude, who could only stand there in silence, unable to respond. Abnormal status nullification was Rude's unique ability. While it was useful for exploring the miasma labyrinth, it had a significant drawback. It did not provide Rude with the combat skills needed to defeat monsters, which are essential for any adventurer. As a result, Rude, lacking any offensive skills, was not welcomed in any adventuring party. His inability to contribute in battles and his reliance on scavenging the labyrinth's lower levels led to his being labeled as the miasma scavenger. This title reflected both his skills' limitations and his role in searching for items in the labyrinth's depths. Ultimately, Rude's ineffective skill caused him to be seen as an outcast rather than a true adventurer. At that moment, Rude reflected on his situation, feeling frustrated that, as a grown man, he still had to fight life or death battles against mere rats. He returned to his inn and lay down on his bed, troubled by the thought that he might continue to live his life as the miasma scavenger. Rude was disheartened by the realization that no one saw him as a true adventurer or respected him. Instead, he was always treated poorly. The next day, Rude arrived at the Adventurers Guild. As he entered, he thought about finding a new patch of miasma grass in a different location, as he still had some money left from the miasma grass he had sold the previous day. Noticing the unusually loud commotion in the guild, Rude wondered what was causing all the noise. Rude approached one of the staff members at the Adventurers Guild and asked if she had any good job requests or tasks to recommend. Upon recognizing him, the woman addressed him as the miasma scavenger and informed him that a new labyrinth had been discovered. Rude was stunned by the news. A newly discovered labyrinth meant it would be filled with untapped treasures and magical items. It was a golden opportunity for any adventurer, and Rude was thrilled at the prospect. He saw it as a chance to change his life and escape his current status. Rude then realized why the guild was so noisy. Everyone was excited about the newly discovered labyrinth. As he surveyed the bustling room, the woman interrupted him, noting that the price of the miasma herb, which Rude typically brought in, would begin to drop immediately. Rude was initially puzzled but soon became worried upon hearing the woman's comment. He asked her why the price of the miasma herb would decrease. The woman explained that the miasma labyrinth had never been particularly popular, and with adventurers now flocking to the newly discovered labyrinth, there would be little demand for the miasma herb. Consequently, prices for the herb were expected to drop. As Rude contemplated his options, the woman added that the new labyrinth was located in the Avellino Mountains and that he would not be allowed to enter. Shocked by this news, Rude asked why he was barred from exploring the new labyrinth. The woman showed him a poster that outlined the entry requirements. Adventurers needed to be D rank or higher to gain access. Since Rude was only an E rank adventurer, he did not meet the qualifications to enter the new labyrinth. Looking worried, Rude told the woman that he was determined to explore the new labyrinth. He asked if there was any way he could qualify to enter. The woman sighed and explained that the rules were strict, and he needed to meet the requirements to gain entry. She added that even if Rude somehow managed to get in, he would likely perish in vain due to his lack of strength and the absence of a party to support him. Without the necessary combat skills and allies, he would be left to face the labyrinth's dangers alone. Rude couldn't dispute the woman's words. She spoke the truth about his situation. At that moment, an adventurer named Bear approached from behind and suggested that if Rude was so determined to explore the new labyrinth, he should join Bear's team as a porter. Bear smiled at Rude, while Rude looked back at him with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. After a short while, Rude found himself in a carriage with Bear's team, en route to the newly discovered labyrinth. Breaking the silence, Bear turned to Rude and expressed his pleasure at having met him. He explained that he had been looking for someone to help carry materials from the new labyrinth but had struggled to find anyone. Bear was relieved and happy to have found Rude for the task. Rude, meanwhile, reflected that Bear's difficulty in finding a porter might be due to all the adventurers flocking to the new labyrinth, making it hard to secure one. As Rude pondered this, one of Bear's companions, a red-haired woman named Sasha, voiced her concern. She asked Bear why they were bringing a miasma scavenger, like Rude, and suggested they should have chosen a different porter. Another companion, a heavily built man named Rick, agreed, questioning Bear's decision and implying they should have found someone more qualified than Rude. Bear then addressed his two companions, telling them not to speak badly about Rude. He explained that, given Rude's experience as an adventurer, it was preferable to have him accompany them rather than a less experienced newcomer. Shifting the topic, Bear turned to Rude and apologized for not properly introducing himself earlier. He introduced himself as Bear, the leader of the Scarlet Sword group, and also introduced Rude to his companions, Sasha, the red-haired woman, and Rick, the large-built man. Bear then informed Rude that the three of them were D-rank adventurers. In response, Rude introduced himself, stating that he was an E-rank adventurer. Bear expressed a desire to learn more about Rude's status before they entered the new labyrinth and asked if Rude would be willing to show him his guild card. Rude complied, taking out his guild card and presenting it to Bear. On Rude's guild card, it was noted that he was a level 7 E-rank adventurer with 4 types of skills. Bear, examining the card, inquired if Rude could use fire magic, as one of his skills was indeed fire magic. Rude explained that his fire magic was too weak to be effective in combat but mentioned that it proved useful in dark places and for cooking food. Bear, smiling, reassured Rude that despite its limited power, the skill still had its uses. A few moments later, the 4 of them arrived at the new labyrinth. Bear, Rick, and Sasha were buzzing with excitement as they stood before the entrance. Bear announced that they had reached the newly discovered Avalio labyrinth. Sasha, brimming with enthusiasm, remarked that it seemed they might be among the first to arrive. However, Rick quickly urged everyone not to waste any time and to start exploring the labyrinth immediately. As they opened the door, they were surprised to find that the labyrinth was already teeming with adventurers. Hundreds of adventurers were already inside, busy collecting loot and making the labyrinth feel crowded. Sasha, seeing the crowds, was disappointed and frustrated. She had expected to be among the first to enter the labyrinth, but it was clear they were not. Bear, noting the situation, informed his team that it appeared most of the first layer of the labyrinth had already been thoroughly explored. He warned that if they stayed in the first layer, they would likely find little to no loot. Rick reassured Sasha, telling her not to be disheartened and suggesting they should head to the deeper levels that hadn't yet been explored by other adventurers. Sasha agreed, excited at the prospect of exploring uncharted areas. Just then, Rude interrupted, pointing out that since this was a newly discovered labyrinth, it would be wiser to map out the first layer thoroughly before venturing into the deeper levels. As Rude made his suggestion, Sasha and Rick rudely interrupted him, dismissing his input and stating that they had no intention of taking advice from a porter. They added that Rude was not in a position to offer opinions. Rick further commented that this was why Rude remained an E-rank adventurer. At that moment, Bear stepped in, telling Sasha and Rick to stop criticizing Rude. He reminded them that Rude meant no harm with his suggestion and that they should consider his input. Although Bear intervened to stop Sasha and Rick's criticism, he did agree with their perspective. He told Rude that if they continued to focus on the first layer, they wouldn't achieve significant results. Bear explained that to find truly valuable and unique treasures, they needed to delve into the deeper levels of the labyrinth. After a while, the four of them reached the fourth level of the labyrinth. As they fought monsters, Rude struggled to defend himself, while the other three found it relatively easy to handle the creatures on this level. Rick, smiling, told Rude not to be intimidated by the smaller monsters. As Rude watched them, he thought to himself that Bear, Rick, and Sasha were far stronger than he was, easily handling the monsters he was struggling to fight. Rude felt overwhelmed and nervous, unable to move his hands or face the monsters effectively. He was unable to contribute to the battle or assist the others in any way. After a while, the three had successfully defeated all the monsters in the area. Sasha remarked that it was a good decision to venture to the deeper levels and added that it was a relief to find no other adventurers in their current level. Bear agreed, noting that while the monsters were not very strong, they had also discovered some treasures on the fourth level of the labyrinth. At that moment, Rick shouted at Rude, demanding that he collect the materials from the monsters Rick had defeated as well. Rude replied that he couldn't collect the materials because they were too damaged, with the monster stones shattered. Rick, visibly annoyed, insisted that Rude should still check the materials, as there might be some that were intact. Rick also reminded Rude not to slack off, emphasizing that as their porter, and being only an E-rank adventurer and a miasma scavenger, it was his responsibility to perform his duties. Although Rude was reluctant to listen to Rick, he couldn't go against him after witnessing Rick's strength in combat. Hesitantly, Rude acknowledged Rick's command and agreed to collect the materials from the monsters Rick had killed. As Rude approached one of the monsters, he saw that the creatures Rick had killed were mangled, their guts and blood creating a terrible stench. Rude wondered why Rick had been so brutal in his method of killing. At that moment, he activated his fire magic, thinking it would be easier to retrieve the materials if he burned some of the monsters' bodies to make the collection process less unpleasant. Seeing Rude burning the monsters, Rick commented to the other two that Rude might be doing so to eat the monster meat. He added that, having been on the exploration for a while, he was starting to feel hungry and found the idea of monster meat somewhat appealing. Sasha, however, urged Rick to stop mentioning it, as the thought of eating monster meat grossed her out. Sasha reminded Rick that it was considered taboo for adventurers to eat monster meat because the monster's magic could be absorbed into their bodies, with unpredictable effects. Rick, smiling, reassured Sasha that he was only joking. He added that once they returned, he planned to use the money he had earned to enjoy as much delicious food as he wanted. But as Rick was saying that, the group suddenly became tense when they heard a powerful roar echoing through the labyrinth. Turning to face the source of the sound, they were stunned to see a towering minotaur standing before them. This B-rank monster was an alarming sight, as minotaurs were typically found in much deeper levels of the labyrinth, not the shallow fourth layer they were currently exploring. The group was thrown into disarray, realizing that they were severely outmatched. Each member knew that defeating a B-rank monster was far beyond their capabilities, given their lower levels and current state. They needed to quickly come up with a plan or find a way to escape, as the odds of facing the Minotaur head-on were overwhelmingly against them. At that moment, Bear shouted at Rude, demanding that he hand over his backpack so Bear could use its contents to deal with the Minotaur. Rude quickly complied, passing the backpack to Bear. He then asked Bear what their plan was to handle the situation and if Bear had any strategy in mind. However, as Bear received the backpack, he smiled menacingly. Without warning, he swung his sword and slashed Rude's back, causing Rude to fall to the ground, in pain and bleeding heavily. Bear's sinister grin revealed that his plan was far from what Rude had anticipated. Bear, after slashing Rude, called out to Rick and Sasha. Rick immediately responded by throwing an axe-like object and activating its spell, Warrior's Encouragement. This spell redirected the Minotaur's focus, making Rude, who was writhing on the ground in pain, the target of the monster's attacks. Meanwhile, Sasha activated her spell haste on herself, Rick, and Bear, boosting their running speed so they could escape from the Minotaur. Lying on the floor in agony, Rude asked the three if they had planned to abandon him from the very beginning. Bear, with a menacing smile, confirmed that Rude had been brought along solely as bait and that they had always intended to leave him behind. Rude was stunned by the revelation. As Bear, Rick, and Sasha fled, they told Rude to buy them some time while they escaped. Overwhelmed with rage, Rude screamed and cursed them for using him as bait and leaving him to die while they ran to safety. At that moment, the Minotaur's attention locked onto Rude due to the spell. Panic surged through Rude as he struggled to figure out his next move. The Minotaur unleashed a devastating blow to the ground, propelling Rude into the air. Though Rude managed to narrowly evade the attack, a pained smile crossed his face. Despite his successful dodge, he knew deep down that escaping the Minotaur was futile. The odds were stacked against him, and he braced himself for the inevitable. At that moment, the Minotaur launched itself with immense force toward Rude, crashing through the wall and sending them both into a new room. The impact was so powerful that the wall shattered, and they found themselves in an entirely different chamber. However, the room had a large hole in the floor, and both Rude and the Minotaur plunged into it. Moments later, Rude lay on the ground, racked with pain, slowly regaining consciousness. As he opened his eyes, he couldn't help but wonder if he was still alive. At that moment, Rude glanced to the side and saw that he was lying on top of the Minotaur's body. He realized that they had fallen through the hole together, and the Minotaur's body had cushioned his landing, saving him from a more severe impact. However, Rude's relief was short-lived as he grimly acknowledged that, even if the Minotaur had died, it was only a matter of time before he would meet the same fate. Rude thought to himself that even if no other monsters appeared, he would still face death from blood loss or starvation. Lying atop the Minotaur's body, he felt an intense hunger and longed for something to eat. As he considered the possibility of consuming the monster, a fleeting thought crossed his mind. Eating a monster could only lead to disaster. Despite this, Rude couldn't shake the memory of a man from his childhood who had once told him never to give up, no matter how tough or painful life became. Motivated by that memory, Rude resolved to survive against the odds and began to eat the Minotaur's body. If a human depleted of magic consumes the meat of a magic-rich monster, the monster's magic particles will invade their body, leading to a condition known as the monsterized state, a fate more terrifying than death itself, as it resembles being poisoned from within. This dreadful transformation has long been considered a taboo. However, in a desperate gamble to recover the blood he had lost and to quell his hunger, Rude devoured the Minotaur, triggering an unexpected transformation within him. Moments later, Rude stood up and began wandering through the labyrinth, dragging an axe in his hand. Upon closer inspection, his eyes had turned red, and he now resembled a monster, seemingly unable to control himself due to the Minotaur's magic coursing through him after consuming its flesh. At that instant, Rude activated his skill, Roar, sending a wave of intimidation through the area. The nearby monsters, overwhelmed by the sheer force of the skill, instantly perished. At that moment, Rude activated his skill, Physical Boost, temporarily enhancing his physical strength. Empowered by the skill, he swiftly killed all the nearby monsters with a single strike. He then activated Echolocation, a skill that allowed him to detect creatures in his surroundings, even in complete darkness. As the skill revealed a swarm of monsters approaching, Rude prepared for battle, a grin spreading across his face. He taunted the monsters, asking which of them would be the next to be eaten. At that moment, Rude went berserk, launching into a killing spree, annihilating every monster that dared to attack him. As he fought, he realized that the battle axe he had picked up after Rick discarded it fit perfectly in his hand. He also noticed he could sense the monster's magic without even needing to see them. Driven by an insatiable hunger, Rude continued his rampage, slaughtering every monster in his path and devouring their flesh. With each one he consumed, he felt a surge of power coursing through his body, growing stronger with every kill. Rude grinned with excitement, feeling an immense surge of power flowing through his body. He knew he could easily defeat all the monsters attacking him. After a few moments, his killing spree came to an end, and he found himself standing before the exit door of the labyrinth. As he pushed it open, he stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. A smile spread across his face as he realized he was finally out of the labyrinth, finally free. With a burst of exhilaration, Rude shouted in triumph, proclaiming loudly that he had survived the labyrinth. Moments later, in the Adventurers Guild, a tense atmosphere filled the room as everyone present appeared worried. A man stood before Bear, Sasha, and Rick, questioning them. This man was Lankars, the guild master of the Bologna branch. After hearing their report about the events in the labyrinth, Lankars informed Bear that he had gathered all the adventurers who had been in the labyrinth, except for Rude, who had been part of their group. With a heavy and regretful expression, Bear told Lankars that when they reached the 4th floor and encountered the Minotaur, Rude had been killed before they even had a chance to protect him. Bear continued his lie, adding that they deeply regretted not recognizing the danger of the 4th floor sooner, which led to Rude's death. Rick and Sasha, meanwhile, put on sorrowful expressions, pretending as if they had genuinely tried to help Rude. After hearing Bear's account, Lankars nodded and said he understood the situation. He then announced that from that moment on, entry into the new labyrinth would be prohibited, as it was too dangerous for adventurers to explore with so little known about it. At that moment, Rude entered the Adventurers Guild, and a wave of shock swept through the room. Everyone had believed Rude had perished in the labyrinth. Bear, Rick, and Sasha were the most stunned, unable to comprehend how the person they had abandoned to die was now standing before them, seemingly unharmed. Bear quickly approached Rude, feigning relief as he said, "I'm so glad you're alive." Leaning in closer, Bear whispered in Rude's ear, warning him that if he said anything unnecessary, he would kill him. Rick and Sasha then joined Bear, smiling with exaggerated excitement as they asked if Rude was all right. Sasha added that they had tried to return for him, but the labyrinth had sealed itself, preventing any chance of helping him. Rude, however, remained silent, saying nothing in response to their lies. At that moment, Bear abruptly changed the subject and excitedly suggested that they celebrate Rude's survival of the Minotaur attack and successful escape from the labyrinth. He proposed they move the celebration to a different location, as the Adventurers Guild was not suitable for such an occasion. However, just as the group was about to leave the guild, they were stunned to find themselves unable to move. Rude seized the opportunity to speak up, declaring loudly that Bear, Sasha, and Rick had used Rick as a pawn in the labyrinth. The crowd was taken aback by Rude's revelation, while Bear, in a state of panic, frantically searched for a way to handle the situation. Bear, now visibly panicked, approached Rude and asked him to clarify what he meant, claiming he didn't understand Rude's accusations. Lankars interrupted, demanding an explanation from Rude about what he had meant when he said that Rick, Bear, and Sasha had used him as a pawn. Rude turned to Lankars and revealed that Bear had stolen his supplies and attacked him from behind. He further explained that Rick had used a skill to lure the Minotaur towards Rude, while Sasha had cast haste on everyone except Rude, allowing them to escape while leaving him behind as bait. The three accused individuals were now in a state of panic as Rude's revelations about their actions unfolded. In a state of panic, Bear turned to Lankars, insisting that they had done nothing wrong and that Rude's accusations were false. As Bear spoke, Lankars informed him that they would uncover the truth. At that moment, a woman approached them, the truth officer. The three were astonished and alarmed to see the truth officer, who rarely left the royal capital, present in the Adventurers Guild. Lankars then explained that, due to the unusually high number of deaths among the porters who had temporarily joined their party, he had called in the truth officer to investigate the matter thoroughly. The three became even more frantic upon hearing Lankars's explanation, while Rude remained calm, knowing the trouble Bear, Rick, and Sasha were about to face. The truth officer, maintaining a cold, neutral expression, examined the group and used her spell to determine who was truthful. She announced that Bear, Rick, and Sasha from the Scarlet Sword were lying, while Rude was telling the truth. The revelation shocked everyone, and Bear, now in a state of panic, desperately pointed at the truth officer and accused her of being wrong. He shouted that she didn't understand what had truly happened and that she was lying. At that moment, Lankars informed everyone that the truth officer's skill was exceptionally rare. He explained that such a skill could not be acquired later in life and was as effective as a unique skill, with no lie able to bypass it. Landkars emphasized that nothing could be more reliable than the words of someone who had pledged their power to the country, directing a look of anger at Bear as he spoke. Bear, overwhelmed by the revelation, could only stare in panic, unable to find a response. Landkars then shouted at the three, condemning them for violating the adventurer's taboo of abandoning a comrade. He accused them of intentionally injuring their allies and using them as disposable pawns. Landkars further declared that, even if their crimes were thoroughly investigated, it was certain their adventurer qualifications would be revoked and they would be reduced to slavery. Sasha screamed in fear at the prospect, while Rick stood in stunned disbelief, unable to process the gravity of their situation. Upon hearing Landkars's words, Bear clenched his fists and muttered quietly that he refused to believe someone like him could become a slave. His gaze turned to the truth officer with anger as he thought that if she hadn't been present, they might have escaped the consequences. In a fit of rage, Bear drew his sword and swung it at the truth officer, intent on killing her. The onlookers were shocked by the sudden violence, but just as Bear was about to strike, Rude intervened, stepping between them and blocking the attack with his own sword. With a fierce look of anger, Rude told Bear that he should not dare to harm the truth officer. Bear was stunned that Rude had managed to block his attack. In retaliation, Rude threw a powerful punch that sent Bear flying backward. The force of the punch was so immense that Bear crashed through the wall of the Adventurers Guild and was propelled a considerable distance away. Rick and Sasha watched in shock, unable to comprehend the extent of Rude's power. Meanwhile, Rude stood confidently, clearly satisfied with his decisive action against Bear. A short while later, in the Adventurers Guild reception room, Rude and Landkars were conversing. Landkars apologized to Rude for any inconvenience, noting that he might be tired after everything that had happened in the labyrinth. Rude assured the guild master that he was fine and then inquired about the fate of the other three. Landkars explained that they would be taken into custody by the staff and subjected to interrogation. He added that if it was confirmed they were repeat offenders who had used their porters as bait, the members of the Scarlet Sword would forfeit all their possessions and adventurer qualifications, and would be reduced to slavery. Landkars then informed Rude that Bear had even defied the truth officer, so he likely wouldn't be seen again. He also told Rude that the three members of the Scarlet Sword had forfeited all their rights to the profits from the new labyrinth. As a result, Landkars said that Rude would now receive all the rewards. Rude was stunned to hear that he would be awarded 200,000 reins, the entire sum from the new labyrinth's rewards previously meant for the three. The news left Rude astonished at the substantial reward he was now receiving all on his own. After a few moments, Rude stepped out of the reception room and stood outside, grinning with excitement. He thought to himself that with this much money, he could easily cover his living expenses. Rude realized that accumulating such an amount through diligent gathering of miasma grass would take a long time, so he appreciated how being an adventurer could yield substantial rewards. As he walked, he noticed that no other adventurers were approaching him. Rude speculated that this might be because they had witnessed his earlier actions. He considered that even if they didn't approach him in the future, it didn't necessarily mean they would be friendly. Rude then thought to himself that if he stood out too much, many adventurers might find his sudden rise in status suspicious. He decided that he would continue earning in the miasma labyrinth as before. Resolving not to dwell on the past, Rude was determined to move forward. With his new wealth, he could finally afford some gear and enjoy the freedom to eat whatever he wanted. Excited about his plans, Rude decided to visit a tool shop first to buy the gear he needed. As he wandered through the market, Rude noticed a magic bag that caught his interest. He decided to get something to eat before focusing on anything else. The next day, Rude returned to the miasma labyrinth and resumed hunting rats. He found it surprising how easily he could defeat the miasma rats now, in contrast to before. Rude sighed, reflecting on how just the day before yesterday, he would have had to avoid 5 of these rats, but now he could take them down effortlessly. At that moment, Rude used his skill appraisal to examine the miasma rats and check their status. He was pleased to discover that his appraisal skill allowed him to view each monster's stats with ease. Rude realized that the skill he had gained from consuming a specific monster could be used not only on living monsters but also on their corpses. At that moment, Rude wondered how much his status had improved. He reflected on how easily he had defeated the rats and guessed that his level might not have increased significantly, perhaps only reaching level 20. Curious, he opened his status screen. To his astonishment, Rude found that his level had risen to 42. Not only that, but his health, strength, endurance, and agility had all seen substantial increases. Shocked by the rapid progression, considering he had been level 7 just a day ago, Rude realized this was an exceptional occurrence. Deciding to investigate further, he decided to check the new skills he had acquired. As Rude reviewed his newly acquired skills, he was thrilled to discover that he had gained many of them. Excited by the prospect, he recalled that the walls broken during his battle with the Minotaur had since been sealed, and the new labyrinth would remain closed for some time. Deciding to explore the miasma labyrinth lightly for the day, Rude was eager to test his newfound power. He couldn't wait to see how effective his abilities would be on the deeper floors. Additionally, he had purchased the magic bag he had noticed earlier and wanted to select the right monster for his first trial. After careful consideration, Rude decided to venture into the deeper levels of the miasma labyrinth. He easily conquered the 6th floor, and then proceeded to the 9th and 13th floors. As he fought the monsters on these floors, Rude realized they were insufficiently challenging for his newfound strength. Determined to find more suitable prey for testing his powers, he pressed on. Moments later, Rude reached the 24th floor of the labyrinth. As he traversed this level, he encountered a monster. Hiding from view, Rude used his skill appraisal to examine the monster's status. He discovered that it was a lizard soldier, level 25, of the dragon tribe, and it possessed 3 types of skills. Seeing the status of the lizard soldier, Rude noted that it was typically part of a group and fought in coordination with its companions. However, since only one lizard soldier was present, Rude decided it was worth challenging. He stealthily approached from behind, drew his sword, and struck the lizard soldier in the back. Though the blow caused injury, it wasn't enough to finish the lizard soldier off. Rude smiled, thinking that the lizard soldier wasn't too formidable. He resolved to make sure his next strike would not miss. At that moment, the injured lizard soldier tried to flee in desperation. Rude gave chase, calling out for it to stop. After a while, the lizard soldier reached a dead end with no further escape routes. As Rude closed in, he told the lizard soldier that it had no chance to escape. However, when the lizard soldier turned to face Rude, it no longer seemed intimidated. At that moment, Rude realized he was in serious trouble. Looking behind him, he saw more lizard soldiers surrounding him, and it dawned on him that he had walked into a trap. Despite the level difference, the situation was dire. One of the lizard soldiers swung its sword at Rude, but he managed to dodge the attack just in time. Rude quickly assessed the situation and concluded that, given the trap and the numerical disadvantage, his only option was to defeat the lizard soldiers one by one. At that moment, Rude struck one of the lizard soldiers, sending it sprawling to the ground. As he moved in to finish it off, another lizard soldier intervened, using its shield to block Rude's attack. Rude was taken aback by the lizard soldier's timely defense. Just then, another lizard soldier attacked Rude from behind. However, Rude managed to evade the incoming strike with quick reflexes. As Rude surveyed his surroundings, he noticed that he was surrounded by numerous lizard soldiers. He thought to himself that, while these monsters were skilled at teamwork, he hadn't expected them to execute such sophisticated ambush tactics or coordinate their movements at such a high level. As Rude considered his options and continued fighting the lizard soldiers, he noticed a high-pitched sound that seemed to precede their coordinated attacks. Looking further, he spotted a red-colored lizard soldier standing at a distance, observing the battle. Rude used his appraisal skill to assess the red lizard soldier. He discovered that it was a general lizard, level 32, belonging to the beast species. Among its many skills, the most notable was command, which allowed it to direct the other lizard soldiers according to its will. Rude smiled with excitement as he realized he had identified the leader of the lizard soldiers. At that moment, the general lizard let out a fierce roar, prompting all the other lizard soldiers to launch a coordinated attack against Rude. Unbothered, Rude activated his physical boost skill, channeling immense power into his strikes. He pushed through the swarm of lizard soldiers and charged straight toward the general lizard. As Rude sliced at the general lizard, he was stunned to find that his attack did no damage. It seemed to have no effect on the creature. The General Lizard retaliated with a powerful sword strike, and realizing he couldn't block the blow, Rude activated his steel body skill. The General Lizard's attack failed to harm him. With a confident smile, Rude addressed the General Lizard, declaring that it wasn't the only one with a trump card. He had one of his own. Rude used his appraisal skill once more, perplexed by the fact that his attack had no visible effect on the General Lizard despite the clear impact he felt. He checked the General Lizard's status and saw that it didn't have any skills enhancing its durability. Rude speculated that another lizard might be using a skill to protect the General Lizard. As he continued to appraise the lizard soldiers, Rude noticed one that was gravely injured. Checking its status, he discovered that it had a skill called Substitute, which absorbed the damage meant for the General Lizard, thereby shielding it from harm. At that moment, Rude swiftly moved to the lizard soldier with the Substitute skill and eliminated it instantly. With its protection gone, the General Lizard was thrown into a state of panic, realizing it could no longer withstand Rude's attacks. Roaring in frustration, the General Lizard ordered all the remaining lizard soldiers to attack Rude simultaneously. But just as they closed in, Rude activated his thread manipulation skill. Rude quickly gathered all the lizard soldiers into one spot, making it easier for him to handle them. He then cast his spell, ensnaring the lizard soldiers in a trap that immobilized them completely. With a satisfied smile, Rude turned to the General Lizard and declared that its end had come. He then swiftly severed the General Lizard's head from its body. After a few moments, Rude had dispatched all the lizard soldiers in the area. He smiled to himself, knowing it was time to eat the monsters he had slain. He reached into his magic bag, which he had purchased with the reward money from the guild. The magic bag, enchanted to expand its space and reduce the weight of its contents when closed, was now a vital tool for him. Rude then retrieved his cooking utensils and seasonings from the bag, preparing to cook the monster meat from the creatures he had just defeated. Rude reflected on his time in the hidden floors, where his only focus had been survival. Despite his desperation, he had always harbored a desire to try cooking monster meat. Now, having prepared it, he admired how appetizing the meat looked and anticipated that it would taste exceptional. Rude eagerly grabbed a piece and took a bite, smiling with pleasure as he discovered that the flavor was indeed superb. The meat was far more delicious than he had imagined, and Rude mused that he might soon become addicted to eating monster meat. As Rude enjoyed the monster meat, he found that he had acquired several new skills, many of which were quite impressive. He wondered how he had gained such valuable abilities and speculated that they might be linked to the magical powers of the monsters he had consumed. Rude reflected on the skills he had acquired, noting that the armor spider skill from the Minotaur was particularly impressive. The evil eye skill from another monster was also quite useful. Additionally, he had gained several potentially powerful skills from monsters he hadn't yet tested. Brimming with excitement, Rude decided that on his way back, he would make it a point to consume as many different monsters as possible to expand his collection of new skills. On the 21st floor of the Miasma Labyrinth, Rude continued to defeat various monsters, systematically acquiring their skills by consuming them. As he dispatched and devoured a diverse range of creatures, he gained a multitude of abilities, including venom, temperature variation, poison scale powder, and many others. As Rude was enjoying the monster meat he had cooked, he suddenly heard a strange sound coming from behind him. Curious, he paused, trying to figure out the source of the noise. It became clearer, a distinct crashing sound, almost human. Rude wondered if there were other adventurers who had managed to venture as deep into the labyrinth as he had. Without wasting a moment, he quickly packed all his belongings into his magic bag and rushed toward the direction of the noise, eager to discover who, or what, might be waiting ahead. Rude thought to himself that encountering other parties in combat was quite rare, and he considered that if he were lucky, he might even have the opportunity to exchange information with them. As he approached, he saw a woman, cloaked and bleeding from her hand, lying on the floor. She was surrounded by a group of suspicious-looking men who seemed intent on doing her harm. One of the men spoke up, expressing disbelief at how much magic the woman on the floor still had left despite her injuries. Another man, who was bruised and battered, explained that their situation was dire because the woman was an elf. He remarked with a hint of curiosity about how valuable the elf woman might be. At that moment, Rude spoke up, saying he had hoped to make some adventurer friends, but he wasn't pleased with the current situation. The men were taken aback by his voice, but Rude continued, admitting he didn't know the full story, yet couldn't just stand by and watch a woman being attacked. The man who seemed to be in charge asked Rude who he was, to which Rude replied that he was an adventurer. The elf woman then shouted at Rude, urging him to leave, warning him that the men surrounding her were adventurer hunters. Rude was momentarily surprised upon hearing the woman's warning. He had always heard that adventurer hunters were high-ranking adventurers. Curious, he used his appraisal skill to check their status, but to his surprise, he couldn't access any information. This made him wonder if they were using concealment skills or perhaps a counter-magic tool. Just then, the leader ordered his men to take Rude down immediately. Without warning, one of them lunged at Rude, swinging his sword with deadly intent. Rude was shocked by the man's speed but managed to block the attack just in time. As they fought, the man remarked that Rude was holding up pretty well against him. Rude, unfazed, retorted that it was only because the man was weak. Enraged, the man shouted that he was not weak and began attacking Rude with increased ferocity, vowing to smash Rude's head. In that moment, Rude activated one of his skills, Venom, and spat it directly onto the man's face. The man screamed in pain as the venom burned into his skin, writhing in agony on the ground. Everyone was stunned by what they had witnessed. They couldn't believe Rude had the ability to spit venom and began to think of him as something more akin to a monster. Rude reflected that his fighting style was reckless, completely unlike that of a typical adventurer. But for someone as weak as him, survival meant using any means necessary to defeat his enemies. At that moment, the man who had been sprayed with venom lay dead on the ground. The leader, witnessing this, realized that Rude possessed a rare skill, poison, and quickly understood they had underestimated him. Determined not to make the same mistake, the leader ordered his men to charge at Rude all at once, hoping to overwhelm him and prevent any chance of escape. As they attacked him relentlessly, Rude dodged their strikes, thinking that if he paused for even a second, he would be killed instantly. He couldn't afford a single mistake. While retreating for just a moment, the leader seized the opportunity and unleashed a devastating blow. At the last second, Rude activated his steel body skill, hardening himself to block the powerful attack, narrowly avoiding serious harm. Rude was sent flying backward from the leader's powerful kick. The leader, surprised, thought to himself that Rude was a tough opponent, as he was certain the kick should have broken Rude's neck. As one of the men approached Rude, he threatened to end his life right then and there. However, as he got closer, Rude suddenly turned and began to run away. The man yelled at Rude to stop running and began chasing after him. However, just as he took off, the leader ordered him to halt, pointing out that both he and Rude were now walking on a poisonous swamp. The leader warned his companion that venturing any deeper would be dangerous, as there was no guarantee they'd survive. He also added that Rude wouldn't last long in the swamp either, and eventually, he'd have no choice but to come back out. Glancing back at them, Rude wondered how long they planned to wait by the edge of the swamp. Realizing that stalling wasn't an option, he resolved to face them head-on and compete as adventurers would. Rude thought to himself how fortunate he was to have ended up in the poisonous swamp. In addition to its toxic nature, the swamp's vapors rapidly drained an adventurer's stamina, which worked in his favor. A few minutes later, the men were shocked that Rude had been inside the swamp for so long. One of the men, visibly struggling to breathe, asked his companions how much longer Rude planned to stay in the poisonous swamp. It had already been 10 minutes, and even though they weren't directly in the swamp, they were starting to feel sick from the fumes. Meanwhile, Rude, who was even deeper in the swamp, remained there, seemingly unaffected. At that moment, Rude decided it was time to make his move. He had waited long enough, hoping the poisonous swamp would weaken them further. However, he realized that if he delayed any longer, it would only worsen the elf woman's condition, as she was seriously injured. Approaching the group, Rude asked how they were faring after being exposed to both the poison and the swamp's magic, and if they were feeling rough. One of the men sneered, commenting that Rude had finally emerged from the swamp and had caused them a lot of trouble. Rude calmly replied that, unfortunately for them, he was unaffected by any status abnormalities, so he couldn't really understand just how much pain they were in. The leader was taken aback upon realizing that Rude possessed a status nullification skill and had tricked them. He immediately shouted for his men to attack and kill Rude right then and there. One of the men lunged at Rude, but the effects of the poisonous swamp had weakened him significantly, allowing Rude to easily block the attack. With a smile, Rude taunted the man as they fought, explaining that the poison gradually drained their stamina while the accumulated magic in their bodies lowered their stats. Just then, another man attacked Rude from behind. However, Rude activated his steel body skill, and the man's sword failed to inflict any damage, leaving him shocked at what had just happened. Seizing the opportunity, Rude then unleashed another skill, Lightning Cloak, swiftly defeating both attackers in one move. One of the men, barely able to breathe, shouted at Rude and prepared to attack again. But in an instant, Rude activated his aerial slash skill, finishing the man off immediately. The leader watched in panic, unable to believe that a human could possess multiple skills typically found in monsters. Shifting his focus to the leader, Rude declared that he had no obligation to explain anything and launched his attack. As they fought, the leader thought to himself that, despite his supposed superiority in combat against humans, he realized he was destined to lose to Rude. Desperate, the man activated his agility enhancement skill to boost his stats. Shouting in anger, he declared that someone like Rude wouldn't be able to defeat him. However, as he swung his sword, Rude delivered a powerful strike that shattered the man's sword into two pieces. The man stood in shock, unable to comprehend that he had been defeated by Rude. In that instant, he was cut in half along with his weapon, lifeless on the ground. Rude looked down at the fallen man and remarked that if it hadn't been for the abnormal status nullification he possessed, the man would have been far stronger. But because of Rude's unique ability, he had been able to overcome him. After a few moments, Rude had successfully saved the elf woman, and they walked alongside each other. She turned to Rude, expressing her gratitude for his help, saying she didn't know what she would have done without him. Rude replied that he couldn't just leave her in such a perilous situation. As he observed her, Rude noticed that the elf was trying to appear brave, but her body still showed signs of being affected by the poisonous swamp's magic. Setting that aside, Rude found it unusual to encounter an elf in such a remote area and began to wonder what circumstances had led her to be pursued by adventurer hunters. As they continued walking, a monster suddenly appeared right in front of them. Using his appraisal skill, Rude identified the creature as the Mosfa's Great, the leader of the Moths, a level 37 monster. Determined, Rude charged at the beast, thinking to himself that its size wouldn't be enough to take him down. At that moment, the monster unleashed its aerial slash attack, but Rude skillfully dodged it. He then turned to the elf woman, asking if she was okay. She reassured him that she was fine. Satisfied, Rude faced the monster again and declared that he was going to scare it, as it had managed to frighten him for just a moment. The monster flew higher, trying to create distance to avoid Rude's attacks. Undeterred, Rude shouted at the creature, telling it that its efforts were futile. He then unleashed his own aerial slash skill, striking the monster and dealing significant damage. Furious from the hit, the monster retaliated by using its paralyze skill. Rude simply smiled at the monster and confidently declared that it was too bad, as paralysis wouldn't work on him, he was immune to it. At that moment, Rude suddenly remembered the elf woman and grew concerned that the paralysis could affect her. However, when he turned to look at her, he saw that she had activated her wind magic, successfully blocking the monster's attack. Rude was impressed by the skill she displayed. After a few moments of intense combat, Rude finally defeated the monster with a powerful strike from his sword. The elf woman approached Rude and expressed her surprise that poison and paralysis had no effect on him, noting that he possessed skills remarkably similar to those of monsters. Rude smiled nervously, feeling awkward as he struggled to find the right words to explain his situation to her. Suddenly, the elf woman winced in pain and collapsed to the ground. Rude rushed to her side, worried she had been affected by the paralysis skill. However, she reassured him that this was something different, adding that she would explain her circumstances in more detail once they were outside the labyrinth. Moments later, they found themselves outside the miasma labyrinth, sitting on the ground near a tree. The elf woman smiled at Rude, expressing how much better she felt now that they were out of the labyrinth. Before explaining her situation, she said she wanted to introduce herself properly. With that, she told Rude her name was Alicia and that she was a former adventurer. Rude was taken aback, asking if she was the one and only Alicia of the Emerald Storm. Alicia laughed and confirmed that she was indeed the adventurer he had mentioned. Rude then remarked that the kingdom of Ludia's renowned S-rank party, known as Azure Trails, was famous, and everyone was aware of its members. However, 5 years ago, the party was defeated by monsters. Upon hearing this, Alicia explained that on that fateful day, they had challenged the monsters lurking in the deepest part of the S-rank labyrinth, known as the Abyssal Labyrinth. During that battle, their leader had died, one member had to retire due to severe injuries, and another had been swallowed by the labyrinth itself. Alicia added that even she hadn't emerged from that battle unscathed, revealing a mark on her chest as proof of her injuries. Rude initially panicked as Alicia began to open her clothing to reveal her chest. However, as he looked closer, he noticed a distinct purple mark on her skin. Alicia explained that this mark was a curse placed on her during the battle, known as the Curse of Level Down. Hearing this, Rude felt confused, as he had never encountered such a curse before. Alicia admitted she was in the same boat, she had never heard of it either. She shared that she had tried every possible method to break the curse but had only managed to slow its progression. Alicia then told Rude that the other adventurers they had encountered were aware of her curse and had been planning to profit from it. She expressed her despair, explaining that she would die if her level reached 0, and she couldn't bear the thought of being at the mercy of those men. In that moment, Rude noticed something and told Alicia that she might have a way to combat the curse. He remembered that he possessed a skill called Substitute, which allowed him to select a target and absorb their attacks and status ailments. Rude expressed his desire to test something out, asking Alicia if she would be willing to accept the skill he was about to activate. Alicia looked at him, confused by what he meant. Alicia then told Rude that she was ready to proceed. Rude placed his hand on her and activated his substitute skill. Alicia was taken aback as she felt the curse within her begin to transfer to Rude. Panic set in, and she urged him to stop, fearing that the curse would affect him. Rude smiled reassuringly at Alicia, telling her not to worry and that everything would be fine, she just needed to trust him. Just then, a dark presence materialized behind Rude, and Alicia stared in shock at the unfolding scene. Rude used his skill, and his unique ability, Abnormal Status Nullification, activated. In that moment, the curse that had plagued Alicia vanished, leaving her free of its effects. As Rude reveled in the success of his actions, Alicia looked at him in confusion and asked what had just happened. Rude encouraged her to check her guild card. When she looked at her status card, she was astonished to see that her status was now normal and the curse had been lifted. Alicia couldn't believe it, she was free from the curse. Rude explained that he had hoped his unique skill, Abnormal Status Nullification, would be able to nullify her curse. He felt a sense of relief, glad that it had worked effectively and safely removed the curse from her body. Alicia, looking at Rude with a mix of frustration and admiration, exclaimed that he was an idiot for taking such a huge risk for someone he had just met. However, her tone softened as she added that she was grateful for his actions. With a warm smile, she thanked him for saving her. Rude returned her smile, placing his hands on her shoulders reassuringly. He told her not to worry about it any longer, conveying his genuine desire to help her. A short while later, Rude and Alicia found themselves enjoying a meal at the Full Belly restaurant. Alicia commented on how delicious the food was, praising the alcohol as well. She added that Rude certainly knew how to pick a good place. Rude, however, recalled the last time he had been there and how he had been kicked out. Concerned, he asked Alicia if it was wise for her to be drinking so much, given her recent injuries. Alicia reassured him, saying she had fully recovered and that on such a momentous occasion, it was only right for her to indulge. With a bright smile, she declared that they should drink to their heart's content. At that moment, Rude turned to Alicia and asked what her plans were moving forward. After pondering for a moment, Alicia smiled and said she wanted to learn more about Rude first. She then asked him why he had chosen to become an adventurer. Rude took a deep breath and shared his story. He explained that long ago, his village had been attacked by monsters, resulting in the loss of both his family and friends. However, In that moment of despair, an S-rank adventurer had rushed to the scene and saved him, allowing Rude to survive despite the tragedy. He told Alicia he would never forget the sight of that adventurer smiling down at him during such a dark time. At that moment, Rude expressed his aspiration to become an S-rank adventurer, just like the one who had saved him. He shared that his goal was to save as many people as possible and that he hoped to accomplish this dream soon. Alicia, hearing his heartfelt ambition, smiled gently at him and said it was a wonderful goal to have. Rude then asked Alicia if she was going to laugh at his dreams, but she reassured him that she understood, as she had once dreamed of reaching S-rank herself. Alicia explained that her current intention was to gain even more power than she had before being cursed. She added that she was certain her companions were still trapped in the deepest part of the abyssal labyrinth. Whatever the outcome, Alicia was determined to challenge the monsters in that labyrinth once again. Alicia then suggested to Rude that, since they were both still weak and needed to gain more strength to achieve their goals, they should form a party together. Just as Rude was about to respond, two men approached from behind. One of them grabbed Alicia's hand and, grinning, told Rude that he had quite a fine girl to be drinking with. Rude glanced at the two men and recognized them as the same individuals who had kicked him out the last time he entered the restaurant. One of the men then told Alicia that she should leave Rude and not waste her time drinking with someone as boring as him. Just then, Rude grabbed the man by the shoulders and, filled with anger, demanded that he let go of Alicia's hand. The man filled with rage at Rude's defiance, and just as it seemed they were about to come to blows, Alicia intervened. She urged them to stop, reminding them that they were in a pub, and suggested that if they were going to settle things, they should do so by seeing who could drink the most. At that moment, the crowd erupted in cheers, excited to witness the drinking contest and eager to see who would emerge victorious. They drank, and before long, both men were too intoxicated and passed out. Alicia, on the other hand, stood tall and unwavering. At that moment, the cheers erupted as the winner was declared, Alicia. She and Rude exchanged glances and raised their thumbs in celebration, relishing their victory in the unexpected showdown. After a while, Rude and Alicia found themselves standing in a corner of the restaurant. Rude complimented Alicia, saying she had done exceptionally well, especially considering how much she had already drunk before the contest. With a slightly dazed expression, Alicia replied that she could hold her own because Rude was her benefactor. She added that she would never stoop so low as to remain idle while he was being ridiculed by the two men. Just as she finished her sentence, the effects of the drinks took hold, and she dozed off, collapsing into Rude's arms. Smiling at her, Rude activated his skill, Substitute, transferring all of her drunkenness to himself. Alicia suddenly woke up, no longer feeling the effects of drunkenness. Rude explained that he had transferred all of her intoxication to himself, leaving her sober. Excitedly, Alicia grabbed Rude's hand and exclaimed that he had first transferred her curse and now her drunkenness, marveling at the wonderful skill he possessed. She insisted that they should definitely form a party together. After a moment, Alicia suggested they celebrate by drinking more, now that she was sober. However, Rude gently reminded her to drink in moderation. Alicia, feeling disappointed, turned to the owner of the restaurant and expressed her sadness about not being able to try any of the special dishes. The owner explained that monsters had taken up residence in the Barnama's fishing grounds, and although he had sent a request to the guild for assistance, all the top adventurers were already deployed elsewhere. As a result, he couldn't prepare any of the special dishes due to a lack of ingredients. At that moment, he asked Alicia and Rude if they would be willing to take on the request to handle the monsters at the Barnama's fishing grounds. The next day, Rude and Alicia found themselves at the Barnama's fishing grounds, filled with excitement and intrigue as they took in the surroundings. Alicia turned to Rude and said they should defeat the monsters as quickly as possible so they could return to the restaurant and enjoy the special dishes. Rude nodded in agreement, eager to accomplish their mission and savor the delicious food waiting for them. At that moment, Rude spotted something moving beneath the water's surface and felt a surge of excitement as he realized they had found the monster the owner had mentioned. However, both Rude and Alicia's expressions shifted to concern as they noticed that they were now surrounded by numerous monsters lurking in the water. In that moment, Rude activated his appraisal skill to identify the monsters surrounding them. He discovered they were called gurnibs, mostly at level 23, and possessed 3 skills: high-speed swimming, water bullets, and snipe. Suddenly, all the monsters launched a coordinated attack, firing water bullets at Rude and Alicia. Rude struggled to dodge their onslaught, as the small boat offered little room to maneuver, making it difficult to evade the incoming projectiles. In that moment, Rude had a brilliant idea and jumped into the water, grinning as he challenged the monsters to come at him however they wished. As the Gurnibs charged, Rude activated his skill, Lightning Cloak, unleashing a powerful surge that struck all the monsters in the water, instantly killing them. As he emerged from the depths, Alicia called out Rude's name in panic, but he reassured her that he was perfectly fine. After surveying the area, Rude realized that although he had defeated many of the monsters, a few remained in the deeper waters nearby. At that moment, Rude couldn't understand why the remaining monsters weren't attacking him. He speculated whether they were simply being cautious or if they were trying to protect something. He then shouted to Alicia, informing her that he was going to dive deeper to investigate the situation. Rude asked her if she could assist him, and after a brief exchange, he secured a rope around his chest. With everything set, Rude took a deep breath and began his descent into the depths of the water. As Rude dove deeper into the water, he soon realized why the Gurnib monsters had ceased their attacks. They were guarding something significant. His gaze shifted to reveal a massive creature looming in the depths. Rude activated his appraisal skill, and the monster's details came into focus. Its name was Tentacles, it was level 38, and it possessed 4 formidable skills, along with impressively high stats. The sheer size and presence of the creature made it clear that it was a formidable guardian of whatever lay in this underwater realm. As Rude gazed at the massive creature, he couldn't help but think about its sheer size. Observing it closely, he realized that this was the source of the smaller Gurnib monsters, it was the one producing them. Rude understood that if he didn't defeat this larger monster, there would be no point in continually battling the smaller ones, as the giant would simply keep spawning more. Determined, he knew that taking down the tentacles was essential to stopping the cycle once and for all. Rude realized that since the tentacle monster wasn't displaying any immediate signs of aggression, he could take a moment to prepare before confronting it. However, just as he began to strategize, one of the monster's tentacles lashed out, grabbing him by the feet and yanking him closer. In that instant, Rude understood that it had all been a trap. The smaller monsters had deliberately refrained from attacking him to lower his guard, allowing them to capitalize on his moment of inattention. At that moment, the tentacle monster lunged at Rude just as he was starting to run out of breath, struggling to stay underwater. Desperate, Rude pulled the rope, signaling Alicia for help. Responding swiftly, Alicia activated her wind magic, propelling the boat forward at high speed while simultaneously yanking Rude away from the grasp of the monsters. Once back at the surface, Rude gasped for air, coughing violently from inhaling too much water. Alicia, visibly concerned, asked if he was okay. Rude managed to sit up, grateful, and thanked Alicia for saving him. Rude informed Alicia that deep underwater, there was a boss continuously spawning Gurnibs, and to make matters worse, the boss also possessed the acceleration heal skill. Alicia responded, pointing out that the monsters had a significant advantage in the water, and her magic wouldn't reach that far, either due to distance or the water's interference. She then asked if Rude had any ideas. Rude replied that there was one possible strategy they could use to deal with the situation. In that moment, Rude realized he needed to make a decision. Since Alicia had placed her trust in him, confiding about her curse and even choosing to form a party with him, Rude thought it was only right to share his secret with her as well. With a serious expression, he told Alicia to promise not to reveal what he was about to share or the actions he was going to take. After a brief pause, Rude returned to the water to face the tentacle monster. As he dove in, he activated his newly acquired skill, high-speed swimming. At that moment, Rude drew his sword and swiftly eliminated many of the smaller monsters guarding the tentacle creature. The tentacle monster lashed out, attempting to strike Rude with its limbs, but thanks to his new skill, high-speed swimming, he effortlessly dodged each attack. As Rude evaded the creature's assaults, he closed the distance between them. Seizing the opportunity, Rude delivered a powerful strike to the tentacle monster. Simultaneously, he activated his lightning cloak skill, channeling it into the blow to finish the creature off. Rude glanced at the corpse of the monster he had just slain and thought to himself that, with its defeat, the fishing spot would finally return to peace. However, one thing weighed heavily on his mind: Alicia. He couldn't stop wondering what she would think of him after witnessing him devour a monster right before her eyes. The thought troubled him as he questioned how she would view him now, and what she might say once they returned. As Rude resurfaced, he looked around to see if Alicia was still waiting for him. When he didn't spot her anywhere, he smiled to himself, assuming she had left. Disappointment crept in as he walked back to the shore, realizing he had let his hopes get too high. Just as he was feeling disheartened, a voice called out, telling him he was late. Rude turned and was surprised to see Alicia standing there, still waiting for him after all. Alicia looked at Rude and remarked that he didn't appear to be injured, so she assumed he had defeated the boss. Rude nodded in agreement. Smiling, Alicia bent down to gather some sticks from the ground, expressing her relief that nothing bad had happened to him, admitting that she had been too worried to sit still while waiting. She explained that she had started collecting branches for a campfire to help him dry his clothes. At that moment, Rude shifted the conversation, asking if she was truly okay with staying by his side, even after witnessing him consume the monsters. Alicia smiled gently and told Rude that while she had been surprised at first, she was happy that he trusted her enough to reveal his secret. She added that it didn't bother her at all. In fact, knowing that he confided in her made her happier than anything. Rude was taken aback by her response and thanked her for trusting him and not abandoning him. At that moment, Rude pulled out a piece of rope and explained that he had another reason for returning with part of the tentacle monster. He told Alicia that he wanted to acquire the monster's skills, so he had cut off a portion of it, planning to consume it and gain its abilities. Rude smiled and told Alicia that it wouldn't be fair if he was the only one eating, so he had also caught a Barnama's fish for her to enjoy. Seeing the fish, Alicia lit up with excitement and eagerly told Rude that she couldn't wait to eat it. Rude, amused by her enthusiasm, chuckled and said that while they ate, he would share the story of the first time he ever ate a monster. After a few moments, the food was ready, and Alicia savored the fish Rude had caught. As she ate, she remarked that it was surprising Rude consumed monsters, and that there was such a unique reason behind why he had to do so. Rude explained to Alicia that eating monsters had given him a chance to grow stronger, allowing him to get one step closer to his dream, despite once being destined to remain a weak D rank. Alicia smiled gently and remarked that the monster meat actually looked quite appetizing when cooked. Excited, Rude agreed, telling her that monster meat was surprisingly delicious. He then added that, while he no longer needed to eat the meat to acquire skills, he was still curious to see how it tasted when properly cooked. And, to his delight, it had turned out to be very tasty. At that moment, Rude asked Alicia if she wanted to try the monster meat he had just cooked. However, Alicia replied that there was no guarantee she would survive after eating it, so she decided to pass and stick with the fish Rude had caught for her. Changing the topic, Alicia once again asked Rude if he would be willing to join her party. Surprised, Rude questioned why she wanted him, noting that as an S-rank adventurer, she surely had stronger acquaintances. Alicia explained that it had been 5 years since she was cursed, and even if her teammates had not perished in the labyrinth, many of them might have retired from adventuring due to the natural limits of human lifespan. Alicia added that most of the adventurers on the front lines had a few screws loose, and despite their strength, she couldn't trust them to watch her back. She explained that for her adventures, she wanted someone she could rely on completely. Extending her hand toward Rude, she said that if it were him, she would feel secure without any worries. Rude smiled at her words and replied that he would gladly join her party from that moment on. Outside the Adventurers Guild, Alicia shouted with excitement, telling Rude that they needed to get ready for their first job as a party. Rude replied that, as an E rank, he doubted they would receive any significant requests. Alicia acknowledged his concern but insisted that they should first register as a party at the guild. With her S-rank status, she believed they would have access to bigger job opportunities. Inside the Adventurers Guild, Alicia and Rude approached the counter and informed the receptionist that they wanted to register as a party. Alicia then handed her status card to the receptionist. The receptionist was taken aback when she saw Alicia's card, realizing that she was an S-rank adventurer and a member of the Emerald Storm. As she reviewed Alicia's and Rude's cards, She asked Alicia why she would want to team up with someone like Rude, who was just a miasma scavenger. Alicia shot the receptionist an irritated look, causing her to immediately halt her questions and acknowledge that she understood Alicia's point. Alicia then explained that she wanted to rank up and asked the receptionist what requirements Rude still needed to fulfill in order to achieve that. After checking Rude's details, the receptionist informed them that Rude had accumulated enough achievements, the only thing he lacked was a solid battle record. Upon hearing that, Alicia asked the receptionist to provide the highest difficulty subjugation request that she and Rude could take on together to help Rude increase his battle record. The receptionist confirmed that she had a suitable job for them. A short while later, Rude and Alicia found themselves near Verona, tasked with exterminating a pack of wolves in the area. Rude used his appraisal skill on the creatures and identified them as gray wolves, all at level 11. Activating his stealth skill, he maneuvered behind the gray wolves and effortlessly slashed each one with his sword. While engaged in battle, Rude instructed Alicia to manage the reinforcements of the gray wolves while he focused on those in front of him. She agreed with his plan, ready to take on her part. At that moment, Alicia activated her unique skill and called upon Sylphid, her spirit magic, asking for a boost in power. Rude watched in awe as Alicia unleashed her ability, Great Wind, creating a powerful gust that sliced through all the charging monsters in a single strike, eliminating them instantly. Shocked by the sheer magnitude of Alicia's power, Rude thought to himself that there was no way anyone could dodge such a devastating attack. Alicia then remarked that she hadn't even unleashed her full strength yet, despite having the curse lifted. Rude, feeling a mix of admiration and anxiety, couldn't help but imagine the kind of devastation she could unleash if she fully regained her power. Just then, one of the gray wolves lunged at Rude from behind. Realizing too late that he couldn't dodge the attack, Rude braced for impact. However, at that moment, Alicia called upon her spirit magic, Sylphid, and activated her spell. The gray wolves became confused as they searched for Rude and Alicia, only to look up and see both of them floating in the air. Rude was filled with excitement and astonishment at Alicia's ability to perform such a skill. He thanked her for saving him, but Alicia replied that he shouldn't thank her, he should express his gratitude to Sylphid instead, as it was the spirit magic that had truly saved him from danger. Alicia shifted her gaze toward the gray wolves and warned Rude not to let their guard down, even though the wolves were of low level. She pointed out that she could see 5 more gray wolves lurking in the bushes nearby. Alicia cautioned Rude that there might be many more hiding behind the foliage beyond those they had already spotted, urging him to be careful. Determined to help, Rude responded that it was his turn to locate the hidden gray wolves. He activated his skill, echolocation, to sense the positions of the wolves concealed in the underbrush. As he focused, Rude realized with alarm that there were still around 30 gray wolves alive and waiting just out of sight. Knowing there were still many gray wolves lurking, Rude smiled confidently, certain he could take them all down easily. He called out to Alicia, instructing her to attack the areas he pointed out, and she readily agreed. As Rude directed her, Alicia began using her skill to slice through the designated spots. Rude thought to himself that while his skill, echolocation, lost precision in open spaces, Alicia wouldn't be able to accurately target multiple areas at once either. However, if they coordinated their attacks from the sides, they could herd the gray wolves into one spot, making it much easier for Rude to eliminate them all with a single strike. Once Alicia finished her task of herding the gray wolves together, Rude descended and activated his skill, Paralyzing Breath, which incapacitated all the wolves. With them immobilized, he easily dispatched them one by one. A few moments later, Rude calculated their success and discovered that he and Alicia had killed a total of 52 gray wolves. Alicia expressed her disbelief at encountering so many in a single day, while Rude suggested that the population of gray wolves might have increased significantly recently. Rude then asked Alicia if the magic she had used earlier was spirit magic, to which she confirmed it was. She explained that she could harness magic by borrowing power from the spirits that exist in nature. Although spirits are generally present everywhere, they don't always reveal themselves. Alicia elaborated that to access the spirits' power, one must offer magic as compensation. She added that she could still cast powerful spells even with a limited amount of magical energy. As Rude had witnessed earlier, she could even perform remarkable feats, such as floating in the air. Rude told Alicia that he had never encountered wind magic that strong before. Just as he was speaking, the spirit playfully approached him, grabbed his hair, and began tugging on it for fun. While the spirit seemed to enjoy itself, Rude was in pain, desperately telling the spirit to stop pulling his hair. Alicia, on the other hand, was laughing at the amusing sight of Rude and the mischievous spirit. She explained that Sylphid loved to play pranks, which was why she was tormenting Rude. Noticing the sky was growing darker, Alicia decided it was time to head home. She activated the power of her spirit, and both she and Rude began to float. Alicia informed Rude that they would fly back together today. As they soared through the air, Rude exclaimed that this was the best feeling he had ever experienced. Rude then asked Alicia what other types of magic she could use. Alicia explained that, in addition to wind magic, she specialized in water, ice, light, and earth magic. However, she noted that spirits of darkness and fire were not a good match for her. Alicia elaborated that if a spirit had poor compatibility with a user, it could demand an enormous amount of magical power or, in the worst case, might refuse to lend any power at all. Hearing this, Rude remarked that Sylphid must have a strong affection for Alicia since she didn't have to expend a large amount of magic to activate her skills. Alicia nodded in agreement with Rude's observation. As they flew, Rude spotted smoke rising from a village ahead and alerted Alicia to the situation. Upon their arrival, they saw that many of the houses were engulfed in flames, and the villagers were in a state of panic. The chaos was caused by a single monster known as the Baphomet. The adventurers in the village were overwhelmed, unsure of how to respond. They had assumed that only gray wolves were lurking nearby, so encountering such a powerful monster left them utterly shocked and disoriented. At that moment, the Baphomet summoned its weapon, a spear, and hurled it directly at the two adventurers present in the village. Just as the spear was about to strike, Rude swiftly used his water bullet skill to divert its trajectory, causing it to veer away from the adventurers. The Baphomet, annoyed by this unexpected interruption, glared at Rude with a simmering fury. Just then, Alicia approached the adventurers and asked if they were all right. They assured her that they were fine. Alicia then informed them that she and Rude would handle the monsters, asking them to provide a report on the situation. Meanwhile, Rude used his appraisal skill on the Baphomet and discovered it was level 27, possessing 5 formidable skills. He noted that although its level was lower than that of the general lizard he had fought previously, the Baphomet's stats were far more impressive. As Rude examined its abilities, he realized just how powerful the Baphomet truly was. At that moment, the Baphomet activated its skills, Principles of Fire Magic and Principles of Earth Magic. Seeing these skills, Rude thought to himself that the fire magic he had learned so far was far too weak and unsuitable for battle. He realized that if he could consume this monster, he might be able to harness its powerful magic for himself, significantly enhancing his fighting capabilities. With that in mind, Rude swung his sword at the Baphomet, but the creature easily dodged his attacks with its claws. Rude considered using brute force against the monster, but before he could act, the Baphomet unleashed a barrage of fire spears directed at him. Seeing the onslaught, Alicia called out to Rude, her concern evident, but he managed to dodge the Baphomet's attacks. She asked if he was okay, and Rude assured her that he was fine. As he observed the monster, he noticed it had fired all but 2 of its fire spears, which it had kept on standby for defense. Rude thought to himself that the Baphomet was indeed a tough opponent. At that moment, Alicia suggested they exchange information, noting that the Baphomet seemed to be on high alert. Alicia informed Rude that it appeared the villagers had not yet evacuated, so she had already asked the earlier adventurers to help with the evacuation. She expressed her desire to avoid collateral damage as much as possible. Rude, realizing that Alicia's magical energy must have been depleted from their earlier fight with the Grey Wolves, concluded that he couldn't fully rely on her powerful magic in this situation. He understood that he needed to take charge. At that moment, Alicia assured Rude that she would handle the Baphomet's magic while he focused on pushing forward against the creature, no matter what. With each spell the Baphomet unleashed, Alicia effectively countered it by using the opposite attribute, rendering its magic ineffective. Annoyed by her ability to negate his attacks, the Baphomet resorted to earth magic, but Alicia swiftly countered this with her wind magic. Rude was impressed by Alicia's precise control, she used minimal magical energy to nullify the monster's powerful spells, demonstrating why she was an S-rank adventurer. Seizing the moment, Rude jumped upwards, activating his skill, Physical Boost, and managed to slice off several of the Baphomet's fingers. In desperation, the Baphomet attempted to retaliate, but it was futile. Alicia launched a devastating attack that caused the monster's entire body to explode. In the distance, the villagers and adventurers anxiously discussed the massive explosion they had just heard. One adventurer expressed concern for Alicia and Rude, uncertain whether they had triumphed over the monster or if it had defeated them. Another adventurer regretted not being able to assist, as he was still nursing his injuries. Just then, Alicia appeared before them, thanking them for their help with the evacuation. Relief washed over the adventurers upon seeing her safe. Alicia reassured them, saying that she and Rude had defeated the monster. However, she mentioned that although she had dealt a fatal blow, she was worried it might still be alive and could return to attack the village. With that, she informed them that she was going to pursue the creature. Alicia then asked the adventurers for a small favor. One of them eagerly replied that he would do anything within his power to help. With a shy smile, Alicia requested some spare food, as she was feeling very hungry. Moments later, in the forest at the outskirts of the village, Rude sat alone beside a fire, the corpse of the monster lying nearby. Alicia approached and informed him that she was back from the village. Rude welcomed her return and inquired about the villagers. Alicia replied that everyone had managed to evacuate safely, thanks to the efforts of the adventurers who had been there. Alicia then informed Rude that she had told the villagers they were pursuing the Baphomet, so they wouldn't be suspicious about the disappearance of its corpse. Rude apologized for putting her in a position to lie but also thanked her for helping him out. At that moment, Rude's attention shifted to the corpse of the Baphomet, and he felt a surge of excitement at the thought of cooking and eating it. After finishing the cooking, Rude sampled the monster meat and discovered he had acquired all the skills possessed by the Baphomet. Alicia remarked that while the meat looked delicious, watching someone eat a humanoid monster was a bit unsettling. Rude reflected that Alicia was right, and he felt a twinge of unease at how accustomed he was becoming to eating monster meat without any hesitation. At that moment, a horde of monsters known as stampings charged toward them. Rude was taken aback by the situation, realizing they had encountered far too many monsters in one day. He quickly got to his feet and told Alicia that, given the circumstances, he would test the new skills he had just acquired from the meat he had eaten. However, when he activated his skill, nothing happened. For some reason, he couldn't activate any of his powers. Just then, the monsters lunged at Rude and Alicia, but they managed to dodge the attacks using their skills. Alicia then remarked that she thought Rude would be able to use magic by now, but he still couldn't activate it. She added that her own magic reserves were running low, so she wouldn't be able to offer much support to him. Rude, on the other hand, was furious and told Alicia that he wouldn't forgive the monsters. Alicia was confused about why Rude was so angry. He explained that he had put in a lot of effort to drain the blood and remove all the impurities from the meat, and it had taken him a long time to do so. Rude added that he wanted to enjoy the food, and after all his hard work to enhance the flavor, it was now ruined and scattered on the floor because of the monsters. He was adamant that he wouldn't forgive them for this. Alicia, still bewildered, couldn't understand why Rude was so upset over monster meat. At that moment, Rude shouted at the monsters, demanding that they take responsibility and insisting that they should be the ones to provide him with their meat instead. Just as Rude was about to charge at them, Alicia grabbed him from behind and urged him to calm down, warning him not to act recklessly. She explained that the monsters had used a skill called Flash Step, which increased their charging power and turned even a single blow into a devastating attack. Alicia emphasized that, despite the monsters being of low level, they needed to maintain a safe distance to avoid the effects of that skill. She suggested that they should retreat for the time being, and Rude reluctantly agreed, knowing that she was right even though he was annoyed by the need to pull back. After a few moments, Rude and Alicia settled atop a tree, safely avoiding the monster pigs below. Alicia then asked Rude why he had been unable to activate his magic earlier. Rude explained that he had never faced such a problem before when using skills acquired from monsters, so he was unsure of what was wrong. Alicia suggested he use his appraisal skill to check for any issues. Rude agreed, and upon inspecting his skills, he reported to Alicia that it indicated he should be able to understand them instinctively. Alicia then remarked that if he still couldn't use the skill, it could only mean that Rude's brain was unfortunately incapable of comprehending magic. Rude, taken aback, responded that Alicia was being rather cruel for saying that. Alicia began to ponder why Rude was unable to use his magic. As she thought, she uncovered a potential clue. Perhaps Rude needed to learn how to manipulate mana in order to wield magic from monster skills. Rude started to grasp the issue he was facing. He told Alicia that he would try what she suggested. Closing his eyes, Rude recalled the first time he had consumed the Minotaur and how he had unleashed its power by fully tapping into its abilities. Rude realized that if he could harness the burst of power within him, he would be able to use the magic. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and discovered that he could now access the magic he had been unable to use before. Excitement surged through him as he thought that as long as he could sense the mana, he could wield it as if it were a part of his own body. With renewed confidence, Rude unleashed a powerful attack on the monsters below him. After defeating all the monsters, Rude took a moment to enjoy the meat he had cooked from his recent hunt. As he savored the diced pork, he commented to Alicia that it was delicious, then apologized for making her wait while he ate. Alicia assured him it was fine, adding that she understood it was necessary for him to replenish his energy. She then explained that to use his magic skills effectively, he needed to draw from his mana rather than pure magic power. Observing that his mana seemed untouched despite his recent attacks, Alicia thought that Rude might be able to use his abilities continuously without exhausting his reserves. Rude nodded in agreement and explained to Alicia that when he felt mana coursing through his body, he immediately understood how to activate his skills. He went on to suggest that if mana could replace magic power, it might be possible for him to enhance his body or even his weapons using mana. Rude then shared that among adventurers, many chose to focus on developing their magic power, with some using it actively in combat. By channeling magic power through their bodies, they could boost their physical abilities, and, when applied to a weapon, it could increase its attack power and even allow them to unleash energy slashes. Hearing this, Alicia realized that, up until now, Rude's limited magic power had prevented him from using such skills effectively. Rude agreed with Alicia's insight, noting that he seemed to have far more than just magic power now. He added that, even more importantly, he could apparently replenish his mana simply by eating monsters. As he said this, he took a bite of meat from the monster he had just slain, and a message appeared, notifying him that he had acquired the skill Flash Step. Observing this, Alicia considered that Rude was able to absorb mana through food and even store it within his body. However, as she thought this over, her attention shifted, and she found herself distracted by the enticing aroma of the monster meat Rude was enjoying, her mouth beginning to water. Noticing Alicia's gaze and the hint of drool as she watched him eat, Rude asked if seeing him enjoy the meal had made her hungry too. Alicia began to reconsider her options and was about to respond when a massive explosion erupted right beside them. Shocked, both turned toward the source, and as the smoke cleared, they found themselves face to face with a colossal monster. Recognizing the threat, Rude told Alicia that the boss had arrived. At that moment, the monster launched a rapid, powerful attack, surprising them both with its speed. Reacting quickly, Rude activated his newly acquired skill, Flash Step, and in an instant, he scooped up Alicia and dodged the monster's attack just in time. Alicia thanked Rude for saving her, but as she did, she couldn't shake the thought of how, just as she sensed something approaching in the distance, the boss monster had suddenly appeared right in front of them. She wondered what was going on, questioning why such a powerful monster would be in this area, especially since they weren't in a labyrinth. Meanwhile, Rude was fuming. His food had been completely destroyed again, marking the second time that day. Frustrated, he pointed at the boss monster in anger, shouting for it to stop interfering with him and his food. Alicia, amused, remarked to Rude that, if nothing else, the monster might make for a delicious roast itself. Rude, however, disagreed with Alicia's suggestion, noting that the boss monster had a fire-resistance skill and wouldn't be bothered even if the oil on its body ignited. Checking the monster's stats, Rude observed that, despite having only 2 skills, Flash Step and Fire Resistance, its overall stats were quite high. Determined to end the fight swiftly, Rude activated his skill, Principles of Earth Magic, and launched an attack at the monster. To his surprise, the monster broke through his attack and charged straight toward him. Taken aback, Rude attempted to activate his steel body skill, but before he could do so, the monster closed the distance and landed a powerful blow, sending him flying backward. Seeing Rude struck by the monster's attack, Alicia cried out in concern. But before she could rush to him, the monster turned its attention toward her. Acting quickly, Alicia summoned her spirit, Sylphid, and unleashed a powerful attack on the monster. Though the attack landed, it wasn't enough to bring the beast down. Alicia felt a moment of relief that she had managed to land a hit, but she soon realized the monster wasn't relying on any special skills. It was using the raw toughness of its thick fur and muscular frame to withstand her attack. She quickly understood that, whether she used earth magic or Sylphid's wind magic, neither had the piercing power needed to penetrate the creature's thick hide. As the monster regained its composure, it prepared to strike at Alicia, who knew that none of her attacks would inflict significant damage. Just as the monster charged at her, Rude regained consciousness and, in a split second, activated his skill, Roar. His deafening shout immobilized the monster, halting it in its tracks. Regaining his stance, Rude warned the monster not to turn its back on him, as their fight was far from over. Analyzing the situation, Rude realized he couldn't rely on Flash Step or Steel Body at the moment. He knew that if he allowed the battle to turn into a drawn-out struggle, the monster might target Alicia again, a risk he was determined to avoid. Rude realized he didn't have a skill powerful enough to take down the monster in a single blow. Observing the creature closely, he noticed it seemed limited to charging directly at its opponents. With a newfound resolve, Rude decided to attempt a technique he had never tried before in battle. Closing his eyes, he raised his sword, mentally preparing himself to give this new approach a try. As the monster barreled toward him, Alicia watched in worry, noting that Rude was standing motionless, his eyes still shut. But Rude remained focused, concentrating on drawing the mana from within his body and visualizing it flowing steadily into his sword. As Rude focused, he channeled the mana within his body into his sword. Just as the monster closed the gap, Rude opened his eyes and delivered a single, powerful strike. The sword cleaved the monster in half instantly. Surprised by the result, Rude marveled at how he had been able to defeat such a formidable creature with just one swing. Alicia, equally stunned, expressed her amazement, commenting that Rude had used his mana to strengthen his sword without any prior practice. Rude explained that he had felt it was the right moment to try, especially since his mana had been leaking out, making it the perfect time to test the technique. However, just as he finished speaking, his sword shattered into pieces, leaving both Rude and Alicia in shock. Rude screamed in frustration when his sword shattered into pieces, but after a few moments, he began to calm down. He told Alicia that he had used the sword extensively, so it was bound to break eventually, and there was nothing that could be done about it. Alicia remarked that it seemed the sword couldn't handle the immense amount of mana he had poured into it. She added that, since a weapon was essentially an extension of an adventurer's body, it was no surprise Rude was upset to see it break. Changing the subject, Rude suggested that they call it a day, and he mentioned that he would take some of the monster's remains with him to eat. In the 7th layer of the miasma labyrinth, Rude's former bullies, now adventurers, were engaged in combat with the monsters in the area. After several battles, they managed to defeat the superior species of miasma rats and the great miasma rats that roamed the labyrinth. One of them commented that it had been a tough fight, but their teamwork had proven more than enough to overcome the monsters. The other two nodded in agreement. As they laughed and celebrated their victory, they suddenly heard a noise coming from a nearby direction. One of them decided to investigate and, when the others asked what was going on, he explained that he had heard a sound from that direction and was going to check it out. As the group made their way toward the source of the noise, one of the adventurers remarked that it was odd to find a staircase in a place like the labyrinth. Another adventurer suggested it might be a hidden path, excitement rising as he anticipated what they might discover. They pressed on, and after a while, they came across a treasure chest. All three of them were thrilled at the sight of it. Upon closer inspection, they determined it wasn't a trap, so they eagerly speculated about what might be inside. When they opened the chest, their excitement grew as they discovered a black sword that appeared both powerful and formidable. One of the adventurers, holding the sword, told the others that he could feel the magic power emanating from it. In response, another adventurer asked, just to be sure, whether the sword could be cursed. As the adventurer asked about the possibility of the sword being cursed, one of the others interrupted him, telling him not to be such a killjoy. He reminded the group that they hadn't seen Rude in a long time, and because of that, they had been struggling without any easy ways to make money. He declared that finding the treasure was a blessing from the heavens, a reward for all their hard work. The other two adventurers, hearing this, agreed and became even more excited about the discovery. As they celebrated, one of them mentioned that he had heard Rude had been spending time with a particularly beautiful elf woman recently. The other two, upon hearing this, remarked that Rude had been acting cocky. They agreed that the next time they encountered him, they would teach him a lesson, reminding him of his place. As the three adventurers were talking, a voice suddenly emitted from the sword, repeatedly whispering the word, kill. Meanwhile, in the frontier city of Bologna, Rude and Alicia walked through the bustling streets. Rude mentioned to Alicia that he was considering consulting with a weapons shop owner he knew about getting a new weapon. A few minutes later, they arrived at the weapons shop, Miner's Hammer, where an old man named Dion, the shop owner, was inspecting the broken sword Rude had brought. As he examined it, Dion remarked that, for a sword he had forged himself, he hadn't expected it to shatter so completely. He added that brute strength alone shouldn't have been enough to break it to such an extent. Dion turned to Rude and asked what he had imbued in his sword. Upon hearing the question, Alicia asked Rude if he was going to tell Dion, to which Rude replied that he would share everything. He added that he had known Dion for a long time and that the old man was not one to carelessly spill other people's secrets. A few moments later, Dion was processing the information Rude had shared about being able to eat monsters and gain powers from them. Upon hearing this, Dion remarked that it was no wonder Rude's power had skyrocketed. Alicia, surprised by Doem's lack of reaction, noted that he didn't seem shocked at all by the revelation that Rude ate monsters. Dion, noticing her surprise, explained that as long as the monster's meat tasted good to Rude, it didn't matter what he ate. Then, changing the subject, Dion asked Rude if he wanted a sword that could withstand blows imbued with mana. Rude nodded in agreement. Dion replied that, including research, it would take some time to craft a new sword that could meet those requirements. Upon hearing Doem's request, Rude asked if there was anything else he could help with. Dion explained that it would be helpful if he had some high-quality magic stones. Rude, in response, told Dion that he had several high-quality magic stones on hand and proceeded to pull out a number of them from his pocket. Dion, seeing the stones, was surprised. Among them were magic stones from a general lizard, a Baphomet, and even a minotaur, all of high grade. Dion remarked that it seemed Rude's skills had improved a great deal since they last met. Rude, pleased by the praise, smiled and told Dion that it made him happy to hear such words from him. Dion then told Rude that if he needed anything else, he would be sure to ask him again. In the meantime, Dion handed Rude a different sword and told him to use it. Rude, grateful for the sword, thanked Dion. However, Dion also gave a stern warning, telling Rude that under no circumstances should he imbue the sword with magic. If Rude were to break this sword as well, Dion would demand compensation next time, and Rude and Alicia both looked troubled upon hearing this. Later, the two found themselves in a restaurant, enjoying their meal. Alicia then suggested that it might be best for them to refrain from using magic attacks for a while. Rude, recalling Doem's warning, agreed and remarked that Dion was truly scary and intimidating when it came to weapons. Alicia then added that although it had been intense, she was glad to have met one of Rude's friends for the first time. Rude, feeling embarrassed, apologized to Alicia for being a loner and not having many friends. As the two were chatting, the bullies who had once tormented Rude approached from behind and interrupted them. One of the bullies spoke up, saying that it looked like Rude and Alicia were having fun, so they decided to join them. Alicia, confused about who the three were, looked at them curiously, while Rude appeared troubled upon seeing familiar faces. Alicia stood up and asked the three if they had a problem with her and Rude. She suggested that they could settle things like adventurers, with a drinking contest. As Alicia spoke to the three bullies, one of them, Rondo, suddenly stepped in front and collapsed onto the table. His teammate Magnus, noticing this, asked Rondo if he had been drinking alone or something, as he seemed unable to stand properly. However, as Magnus spoke, he noticed that Rondo was holding the sword they had found in the labyrinth. Magnus was confused and asked Rondo why he still had the sword, as he thought they had sold it. As Magnus questioned him, Rondo began murmuring, repeating the same word over and over. Suddenly, Rondo snapped and shouted the word, "Kill," before slashing at Magnus with the sword, badly injuring him. Right after slashing Magnus, Rondo turned his sword towards Alicia. Just as he was about to deliver a powerful attack, Rude stepped in and blocked Rondo's strike, telling him that it seemed this wouldn't be resolved with just a drinking contest. Rude, confused by Rondo's behavior, wondered what was happening with him and the other adventurers. Angrily, another adventurer stepped in and demanded to know what Rondo was doing at a drinking party, telling him to leave immediately. As they tried to force Rondo out, he overpowered them and began slashing at them as well. Before Alicia launched her own attack, she apologized to the shop owner for what was about to happen. With that, she activated her spell and sent it flying towards Rondo, sending him crashing into the wall and destroying part of the restaurant. However, much to Alicia's surprise, Rondo quickly got back up and approached her again as if nothing had happened. Rude was also surprised that Rondo was still standing after Alicia's attack. He asked Alicia if she had held back her strength, but Alicia replied that any average adventurer should have been unable to get back up after taking one of her hits. Just as she said that, Rondo went berserk again, charging toward Rude and Alicia, shouting that he would annihilate them both. Rude braced himself and told Alicia that the situation was worsening. Alicia quickly directed one of the bystanders to treat the injured if they could use healing magic. As Rude continued to fight, Alicia warned him to be careful, explaining that Rondo was wielding a cursed sword. Rude then noticed that Rondo was powering up, absorbing magic from the sword. Rondo delivered a powerful attack toward Rude, but Rude was able to block it, though barely. He quickly noticed that each of Rondo's strikes was heavy and packed with immense power. As they continued fighting, Rude managed to land a hit on Rondo's legs, but to his surprise, the wound began to close up as red, tentacle-like tendrils wrapped around Rondo's body. Alicia, watching the fight, thought to herself that if she used her magic to assist Rude, it might be absorbed by the cursed sword Rondo was wielding. She realized that in order to help, she would need to find an opening and deliver a decisive blow to Rondo. As Alicia was contemplating her next move, one of Rondo's teammates, Rigard, shouted at Rude and Alicia, begging them not to kill Rondo. Rigard explained that while he knew they had done terrible things to Rude, he had only been able to look down on those beneath him and that Rondo and Magnus were his only sources of solace. Tears began to flow from his eyes as he begged Rude to spare Rondo's life. Hearing Rigard's words, Rude replied that he would try his best to stop Rondo without killing him. He then turned to Alicia and told her that he was going to use his substitute skill and asked her to leave it to him for a while. Alicia agreed. As Rude continued to fight Rondo, he thought to himself that when he had used substitute on Alicia, it had taken about 10 seconds. The challenge now was figuring out how to keep Rondo under control while he worked on removing the curse that was affecting him. At that moment, as Rude was deep in thought, Rondo landed a powerful attack on him. Alicia, seeing this, shouted in concern, worried for Rude after witnessing the impact of the attack. Despite the force of the blow, Rude managed to block it, though he noted to himself that Rondo's strikes were heavy. Rude quickly realized that if he could just hold Rondo's sword back, he would be able to use his substitute skill on him. In that instant, Rude activated his skill, Principles of Earth Magic, which bound Rondo in place with the spell. Rude thought to himself that if the cause of Rondo's state was a curse, he could remove it the same way he had done for Alicia. With that in mind, Rude activated his substitute skill on Rondo, hoping to restore him to his senses. As Rude used his substitute skill on Rondo, Rondo briefly regained consciousness and pleaded with Rude to save him. However, before Rude could react further, he was sent flying backward. Alicia, concerned, asked if Rude was okay, and Rude replied that he was fine, but he added that his substitute skill had failed on Rondo. Rude thought to himself that it wasn't Rondo rejecting the skill but likely the sword's influence. He reasoned that if he could weaken the sword's power further, he might be able to overpower it. Determined, Rude activated his principles of fire magic and directed it toward Rondo. But just as Rude launched his attack, Rondo broke through Rude's restraints and managed to block the incoming spell. At that moment, Rude realized that he had only managed to remove the curse from Rondo's right arm. He thought to himself that if this was the case, he would need to attack from outside the reach of Rondo's right arm. However, as they continued to fight, Rude was caught off guard by Rondo's sudden movements, and to his surprise, his magic was being absorbed once again by the sword. After absorbing a significant amount of magic power, the sword took full control of Rondo's body, and in that instant, an incarnation occurred, meaning the body was no longer Rondo's. Rude quickly activated his appraisal skill and discovered that what stood before him was no longer Rondo but instead a two-headed curse known as Graham. The creature immediately launched a powerful attack toward Rude, and though he tried to block it, the force of the blow was so intense that it sent him flying backward, causing significant damage in the process. Rude thought to himself that the monster he was fighting was incredibly fast, no longer making any unnecessary movements. It attacked with precision, as if it were a seasoned veteran. Just as the monster was about to strike again with a powerful blow aimed at finishing Rude off, Alicia intervened, disrupting the attack. At the same time, she launched a powerful strike that created some distance between them and the monster. Alicia then told Rude that it seemed she would have to step in between him and the monster for a while. Rude, grateful for her timely intervention, thanked Alicia for saving him. He then remarked that he hadn't known she was capable of close-range combat. Alicia responded by saying that a wizard who became useless when the enemy got close was nothing but a burden, and she didn't want to be that way. As a result, she had learned close combat techniques as well. Alicia told Rude that the monster controlling Rondo was no longer an opponent they could afford to underestimate. She explained that Rondo's curse had advanced too far, and there was no way to stop it unless they destroyed his heart. Rude, troubled by Alicia's words, realized he had no other choice but to agree with her. Meanwhile, Magnus and Rigurd were still dealing with their injuries. The healer was advising Magnus not to get up as he continued to heal him, but Magnus, despite his condition, asked Rigurd if he had heard Alicia's warning about Rondo. He asked if they could only defeat Rondo by destroying his heart, and Rigurd, clearly troubled by the situation, could only nod in response. Back with Rude and Alicia, the two were still engaged in combat with the monster. Rude thought to himself that even with both of them fighting together, they still couldn't create a decisive opening. Rude then wondered if the monster's two heads were providing it with a broader field of vision. He called out to Alicia, asking her to step back for a moment as he planned to try something with the monster. Rude activated his spell, reducing visibility in the area. Alicia, seeing this, understood Rude's strategy. He was attempting to limit the monster's vision. As the creature scanned the area, searching for them, Rude quickly moved behind it and severed one of its heads. At that moment, Alicia summoned her Earth attribute spirit magic, Nomia, and the spirit delivered a powerful strike aimed at the monster's heart. However, after the attack landed, Alicia looked troubled as it had only grazed the monster's heart, doing minimal damage. At that moment, the monster was about to attack Alicia, but Rigurd and Magnus suddenly appeared and blocked its strike. Rude was surprised to see them intervening to stop Rondo, but Rigurd spoke up, telling Rondo that he would stop him even if it meant sacrificing himself. With his sword pointed directly at the monster's heart, Rigurd declared that it would always be the three of them, together until the end. As he finished speaking, Magnus launched a powerful attack at the monster that had taken control of Rondo's body. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.